So, the words that went into the world about this afternoon of prayer are the sacred root of life, her hidden light. We call these public talks, but they're really for us who are here. Some of us know each other for a long time, and quite a few of us are meeting for the first time. So, pretty close to 10 years ago, I was asked to bring a body of teachings alive in this time. I come from a very, very old tradition that has not been on the surface for a long time. Relatives of this tradition have. They've mostly been men. It's a mystical tradition that watches over the sacred root of creation, which was given to human beings to tend. In the beginning. In the Western traditions, Christian, Judaic traditions, Islamic traditions, the time when Adam was given the names, which I translate as a woman in a tradition that guards life as to be given the names of creation is to be given the prayers and the medicine to tend the divine as it manifests here. And it is not an idea, any more than a sunflower is an idea of its seed. So, to bring a body of teachings alive in a time when life as we know it is being extinguished. My teacher speaks of the sacred root of life has been cut by our hand, not by an ice age or an asteroid. By our hand. So, when I say public talk, really what I mean is an email goes out or a phone call is made where a note is struck that if it resonates to you, we come sit together for an hour, for 2 hours, whatever the time that we are. How long does a mayfly live? Or a delphinium blossom stay open? There's a time of prayer that is so deep in the design of a human being. And we seem to have forgotten this. We've even forgotten it in this culture, in the places where people with true longing are running to remember it. Prayer has become something to be bought and sold. So, I always say I was asked to engage in an impossible conversation. And I was made for it. Probably many of you were too. To live something impossible grinds us down. It lowers our head. In time, we need one another more to be in right relationship to our birth. And for some of us, to a very deep sense of responsibility that we came in with. And we look for teachers, we look for vocations, we look for places, we look for friends that allow this resonance that we came into the world with to live. So I started working in a very particular way, almost entirely, I would say, in conversation. So the first public talk I gave was called At the Kitchen Table. To bear a quality of silence that calls forth what is essential in our speech. Her hidden mystery is silence. We live in such a loud world. Our minds have become so loud. We're so impatient with one another. So, just a little bit for those of you I haven't met before. One of the mysteries that unfolds daily, I would say, but certainly seasonally, in the way, hello, this tradition appears in service to those who come. Period. Water for the thirsty. Words to tend the tears in the soul. Not new ideas. A living tradition is literally passed hand to hand. The way trees pass themselves. The sincere longing in the hearts of those who are thirsty is what calls forth the words. It isn't a curriculum that's handed to me or you. It's a living transmission of love, whose purpose has always been to awaken souls in times of great crisis to this first promise that we made. The Sufis have a beautiful saying that points back to the first promise, which was, before the not yet created world or the not yet created humans, the Lord said, "Am I not your Lord?" And we said, "Yes, we witness it." At the very beginning, why we are here. We aren't here to become better. This is an error in translation. Truly. It's an error in word. So it's a little bit like speaking an extinct language to intrude in a culture that's entirely about us becoming better. Mystical life is one is reduced to the origin. One does not achieve the origin. So, the sacred root of our civilization has been cut. So what does that mean? What does that look like? How do we feel about that? Not always does this tradition appear with medicine directly, but the work that comes through me does include medicine. And one of the most important gifts of that I see is that many, many, many of us can barely feel. Reactive emotions is not the same thing as feeling. So many, many, many people have no feeling about how lonely we are. Until there's an empty enough vessel with a living transmission of love to actually feel the screaming. This isn't bad news. I know when you first meet me, it might sound a little bit like bad news. There is an ancient, ancient system of how a human being is returned to the source. It's always been watched over. It's always been there for someone who must enter. It bears no resemblance to what we call religion, though sometimes there's an overlap in individuals. An ancient system that fires a human being, whether you want to say transforms a heart from a physical organ made of flesh to gold light, which is a European tradition of alchemy. The Taoist tradition, the way they speak of it, is the making of the immortal fetus. So a lot of the Chinese traditions of internal cultivation build a uterus in which the light of the soul incarnates consciously. My teacher says those souls that have taken birth for one purpose, for the love of the real. This system is never reinvented any more than water is reinvented. It can be hidden. The door to this training, this cultivation, this fire, there can be lots of tricks in front of the door. There always have been. I was reading this morning about a very great saint from the Middle East in the 12th century, and how loathed he was for being true to a direct experience of the divine while in a body. So, the hidden light, there are poems. Ancient Taoist women left many, many poems. Washing dishes while singing the hidden light within creation. Mending husband's cloth while tending this vast, eternal light hidden inside the stone of their kitchen table. Alchemists, truly, but in life, not in a little laboratory, gaining power. It's hard not to despair, which is partly why I have public talks, is to be together. It's hard to know how to live with so much stimulation. We have a little meditation group here that meets twice a week, and it's quite many years, even with people who've meditated a long time. It can be many years to be able to return to the silence within the heart. So in the tradition of esoteric, the hidden way, let's call it that. A lot of these words are all getting misused these days, sadly. The hidden way is the fire within the heart of the human being that bridges the worlds. We are not the only world, you and I, sitting here. When God gave Adam, or perhaps there's another tale, but we'll not go into that today. When God gave Adam the names of creation, when the name of every living being, seen and unseen, was put into the heart of a human being, imagine if this was conscious in us again, how we would walk. We walked by a bush and the bush knew we knew it. We were not lonely. How possibly could we have been lonely? Like a goose lives inside its migration pathway, we lived in the footprints that were given to human beings. Such power was given to human beings to know the name of everything. And then we started this great experiment called free will. And we're at the end of a dream now. We're at the end of a terribly violent experiment of how to live a certain power. And so I'm here, we're here, the school was given and made as a place to follow the original fire. And as most of the great ones who left us written footprints have said, you cannot get past the first way station on that road alone. So, mystical life and the Puritan values of self-reliance in North America do not mix easily. And I mean, for years they don't mix easily. So, it's why we're a school. And when we gather together just for an hour or two on a given day, something is always given. Something alive is always given into the hearts of everyone who has come. This is a tradition that was originally in the hands of the women. How your hand brushes the grass as you walk by. How the earth is touched. And by this, it's not just the earth outside of us, it's the earth inside of us. The hidden light of the mystery can be passed from heart to heart. It's how we were made. Like the hummingbird pollinating the bee balm. The damage to the feminine in every direction that you could possibly gaze. It's as if it's taken down the bridges between us, but spiritually between the worlds. So this particular transmission of this particular tradition, first and foremost goes to her, in us. Without her hidden light, nothing new can be born. A certain rage that is like a wildfire through the unconscious of human beings, which is manifest everywhere now. We have a invasive plant called dogbane. It's beautiful, but it wants the whole property. So we've been every year slowing her down, plant by plant. And I think about this rage that's in the unconscious of humanity, that arises from this terrible wound of the feminine, in men, in women, in children, in dogs, in plants, in trees, in waves, in ice flows. Whether you go to the most personal level or the most archetypal level, or even to the absolute. So, I listen to the women, or I listen for them. The light hidden in the fabric of our relationship to each other, to the earth, to the ones who are not yet born. We put God in heaven. We've been living a dream of a transcendent Almighty that we can't touch. Our notion of the spiritual path is a ladder up. That time is over. Secrets whispered by lovers. You can sit in this room for 5 years and hear one word, and the current of that one word will take you home. I like to use the words as they came to the saints before, but recently it's been going through my mind like a bell ringing. A brotherhood of migrants who keep watch on and for the world. We belong to no one. Without a living tradition or a teacher or a spring where the words of this privilege to keep watch on and for the world, this burning privilege for truth. Mostly, you see it in some of the young people, mostly that not belonging to anyone, because we belong to the source. But without a context, without a sacred root, without a sacred context to life, that mostly turns into narcissism. Because I am ceaselessly looking for myself. Because there's not a sacred context, there isn't the stories. When I was 20, I was going to school in Sri Lanka. As part of that, I lived in a Buddhist nunnery for a period of time, and they would tell these stories of they lived on nothing and were starving. You know, the villagers didn't give the nuns very much. It's a very male-dominated culture. The monks had gold and they were all overweight, and the poor little nuns were these little... Anyway, but they would gleefully tell the story of how they were still revered as more authentic, because there were these stories of 11-year-old girls waking up in the night screaming for truth and running to the nunnery, mad with necessity. So that story was given to me when I was still very young. So I had a context for a sorrow without end. I had discernment because of that story. I didn't get pulled into webs of teachers. I was an American girl, but I had that story. And I knew it was me, even though I didn't live there and I didn't want to put robes on. And I didn't get confused, luckily. Without a sacred context, this call of the soul that one doesn't find, one it's born with. Yes, we witness you. It looks like suffering, dissatisfaction. Sometimes someone doesn't feel it until 60. Traditionally, that was the way it went in the old Indian tales. Right? You lived your life until your life, there wasn't anything more to do. You had your children or you didn't. You had your jobs or you didn't. But at that point, there are young ones now being born with that sorrow pounding them at 16. What is the purpose of life? Why am I here? We didn't call it her hidden light for a very, very long time, except in the deepest, most hidden esoteric schools in Italy and Greece. They knew that the spiritual path was a descent. It was secret. You are taken to face yourself. And it is her face that both confronts you and welcomes you. It is her beauty that scares a soul true in the old tales. It is not her beauty that holds you and says, you're perfect and everything's all right and you'll never be anxious again. The journey home, the Sufis call it. The Taoists say to live the promise of an authentic human being. And it is said it is the most difficult task to undergo of any on the earth. So the good news is there's a door here. The bad news is it's the hardest work a soul will undertake. And there's a bit of a trick going on in America, spiritually, where spiritual life is offered as a solution to all our problems. It's offered as a solution to global warming and the extinction of life. It's not true, I'm sorry to say. So this particular light, this particular current of love does not make a person shiny. It doesn't answer all the questions of life. It reaches to the cry for truth, one person at a time. It remains hidden. Imagine that. You know, one of the terrible, unspeakable legacies we're in is rape at the level of the spirit, where our relationship with the hidden perfection of God has been exposed. So we're very quiet here. We don't advertise. People show up here in very strange, funny ways. Sometimes as patients, sometimes a talk like this. The work is always in conversation. Heaven calls and earth responds. And we are born into this conversation of life. And spiritual traditions, threads, songs of creation is what I call them. The singing between earth and heaven, between God and humanity. To stand between heaven and earth and praise what is most holy. That's what the Taoists say we're here for. But we don't know how to do it. So how many years here for us to admit, finally know how little we remember? The training to remember the divine. Inside of the heart. Not in our jobs. Right? Not a name tag. I do this workshop every few years in New York City for training acupuncturists. Well, physicians of all different traditions. But the workshop is we sit on a bench on this walkway in New York City. And I say, okay, bombs are being dropped. The buildings have gone on fire. Everything's flying through the air. Everyone's running for cover. And someone hands you 7 newborn babies. And says, see if you can get them to safety. So the workshop is pick the 6 people, other than yourself, that you're going to give an infant to. Because you can't carry 7, you won't make it. So, as physicians, pick the 6 that you will give an infant to with everything going on. And then you have to make a case for why. What is it about that person that you would trust to get a baby out of this? So the workshop is about awakening the eye of the spirit. What do we mean by integrity? We aren't asking this of each other as we pass each other on the street. We're putting our eyes down, earplugs in. Do you remember as children that feeling, are you real? My mother used to say that people got nervous with me at the kitchen table. All I wanted to do was watch the light and when it would disappear and when it would appear again. Every individual human being is an exact replica of 18,000 universes. And most of us are full of anxiety, not sleeping well, lonely, angry, think we're worthless, think we're Napoleon. Pick either side of that seesaw. Right? One human being is an exact replica of 18,000 universes with the right eye, the right hand, the right word, in a room that's full of silence, a room that waits for you. Which of course is the heart. We learn how to hold someone's hand. The light within my hand to the light within your hand. The instructions for love are in the love, not in my head, not in my pathological emotions. in the light itself. The one thing that we can be sure of is the darkness. It can corrupt almost everything right now, but it cannot corrupt real love. So like the alchemists in the Dark Ages in Europe, small groups gather. Placing their gaze upon the hidden light. And that gaze is purified, which isn't it's another word that doesn't really translate from the Vedas to America. People don't know what that means, purification. I didn't. But as an actual living process, that a seed of light is given, it is planted in your heart, and it begins to purify. It begins to make it possible to hear the dissonances in yourself. Purification doesn't make you feel all better. It wakes you up. This is not a school of therapists, right? This is not a school to figure this out. It's a school of mystical love. The love itself purifies these dissonances. There's a little bit of repair that has to happen in the mirror we call life in us. She is fractured. So there's a certain amount of time when people come where I would say it's repair. The purpose isn't the mirror. The purpose of true lovers of God is not the mirror. The purpose is the emptiness from which love arrives. I'm amazed again and again in this impossible conversation how there is a moment when the absolute anguish of a person's life is revealed to be the true longing of their soul. And it is a moment. Christ spoke of it as when we are reborn. That word's been used in so many different ways, it's hard to reclaim it. Some words we must wash of the power problems of human beings because we can't remain oriented without certain words. So one of them is soul. We must have this word. We must extract it. We must take it back and clean it. I cannot know my soul's purpose. I cannot have a conversation with my soul. There is no such thing as living my soul's purpose in an American way. It is the light of God that just before your foot touches the ground, or a glimpse of your teacher just as your head turns. It's an eternal light in a transient world. So we're buying and selling that word. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Has to be retrieved. To walk upon the earth as the bride of God. 20 to 40 years, the Sufis say. Probably not that long for a sincere person today because of the need. The urgent need that you become visible to creation. There's a certain light in the heart when it is unveiled, when the ash is blown off of it, you're visible again. And even though you don't consciously know the name of the tree that you are passing, or you don't see the light being that is guarding that river, If the light is on in you, you are visible to them. And a link of communication can happen. This is our heritage. Thomas Berry speaks about how we left the conversation of life. So we're here today for each person to be given a little light, substance of love into the heart, to remember.
When you speak of the soul and how, I guess I have my idea of what the soul is, but can you maybe clarify that a little? I guess what I think of is like I'm more than a physical body.
Right.
And I guess that's what I call my soul.
Yeah.
So,
yes, I would say the light of God that animates the clay of our body.
okay.
Interestingly, though, the Upanishads, which are the ancient texts in the earliest of Hindu traditions, the Vedas, they speak of the soul as smaller than small and larger than large. So sometimes when I'm trying to ring the bell, for instance, if a conversation in a group has gotten very, very psychological, and you want to ring the bell, you might say something like, remember when we were little and we would go outside, take our blankets and hot chocolate, and lie down on a blanket and look up. And instantly you're minuscule. The soul, your name is connected to your soul. There's an ancient mystery of the soul of the newborn, of the person coming in, calls its name. And almost always the parents hear it. Every once in a while there'll be someone that there's a funny mismatch. And you're like, what? But the soul has a connection to your name in that deep mystery of the way the divine comes to know herself is through creation. So the name of each bit of creation returns home one fine day. So the name is also attached to the ego. But there is something very holy in our names. There's a particular place when I work in the medicine. These ancient songs of creation were woven in by the earliest of Taoist physicians, so 5,000-6,000 years ago. They wove some of these early threads of conversation between the moon and the stars and the earth, for instance, one of them. Between the seen and the unseen of current inhabitants of the earth. There's a particular song, thread, a weave of communication. When you're working in the medicine in human beings, they're very often, I'll come running across the room and say, what is your mother's name? What was the name you were born with? Because there's a resonance, it's like a bell. You can't touch the soul.
You can't?
No. The light, the communication between the light in my heart and the light in your heart sings. And it sings in oneness. So when it's like if we're two cellos, start singing, it starts resonating in everyone. It's the music that lets us know that we're in the presence of the soul. And the minute that that's happening, I could care less what you had for breakfast, what you do for work, who you're married to even. Even important things, they fall away. And one of the things I think of is I wait for you. Like, you wait for the sun. This deep, ancient devotion wakes up. And it happens in a second. This is a tradition that's, the stories of it through time are about the stranger of the door. You open the door, and the eyes that greet you have known you forever. Can't be bought and sold. The word can be, but...
When you talk a conversation,
Yeah.
do you mean, is it a vibration? Is it a, I'm transmitting, you're receiving? Or both? Like you said, these words that we use are so, even the words themselves have a lot of baggage, if you want to call it that, like truth.
Mm-hmm.
So their idea...
Talk about a word that's going extinct.
Right. How do you bridge that? Is that what this when you say the conversation, is that what that is?
To start where you are first, I do think that we have settled for very little in what is possible in the exchange between people. I do believe that human conversation has become fast food.
Mm.
It's not nourishing us.
Right.
And I think most people in America, anyway, have forgotten that that is the purpose of conversation, is the nourishment of our life. So on that level, yes, I have a great love for communication, and I always have. So whatever I'm doing, that level of how we're starving ourselves, I do pay attention to. Someone who's worked with me for many years, we just worked for a few days together, was weeping last night at the end because this profound experience we'd been in together for 2 days, and she was weeping because she wanted to say something in response to what had been given, but she didn't have the words.
Mm.
So the weeping was the conversation. And I'll tell you the relief of the sound of the weeping instead of the sound of words trying to find something meaningful. The weeping was the conversation. There's a beauty to that necessity between people that I'm a servant to. I love it. When I'm talking about the conversation of life, it's much vaster. There's an urgency to it. It works inside of the movement of the seasons. There's only a particular time that the monarch caterpillar makes a chrysalis. So the conversation of love that the world is woven with minute by minute by minute, I call it the Song of Genesis. It's happening all the time. And we have gotten so dull in our greed and striving for power that we actually are out of it. We don't know it's happening. You know, we go to the Grand Canyon and we take selfies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's really gotten extreme. This has been a gradual process, really, since, one could say the time of the Inquisition was a fundamental cut. And then into the Age of Enlightenment, we've shifted our relationship to the conversation that is creation. And creation is a divine mystery. So to come into the mystery of God is to come into a conversation. So the ears are washed and opened over years. There's a beautiful old story, which is at the heart of how I work. And the story is that there was a lute player who played the most beautiful music that anyone had ever heard on earth. And wherever this lute player went, people would gather, animals would gather, plants would turn their heads toward it. And he would travel and he played this music. And he had a friend who traveled with him. The friend didn't have a name, but was always with him. And the friend listened to the music of the lute player. And one day the friend died, and the lute player cut the strings of the lute and never played again. Because without the one listening, there's no music. So there's a symbol, I think it's the Renaissance, but there's a symbol that they have of the cut strings of the lute for friendship with a capital F. And one of the old names of this tradition is the Friends of God. So how do we enter a conversation is how we listen. And our presence listening, oh my goodness, the celebration. One human being. The power of the heart of one human being to transform fear into hope, despair into praise. It's profound what a human heart really is. Being born into a culture where the sacred root has been cut. You see, we're having conversations above the surface of the water, not even on the surface of the water. Watch the conversation of water bugs. I made a joke earlier that we'd all go down and have this conversation in our clothes sitting in the river, and we'd have a conversation about water bugs. To watch the jubilation of a water bug. The communication between the water bug and the river. Just for starters. It's very painful sometimes for people when they first come into the circles, because what happens is we realize how unable we are to speak words of love, except in human relationship. We've held on to a certain story of love with our children and love with our mates. But the pounding of the love of creation in our hearts, we don't have words to speak back. So there's a lot of weeping. The price of materialism. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for coming out on a Sunday. These Sundays in Maine are so precious in the summer.